Shabbat Shalom, and this is 10 Minutes of Torah. Not two kinds of every animal that are to go on the ark, and not, 8 human beings on the ark. Nope, this is 10 Minutes of Torah. Well, Shabbat Shalom to everyone, and a few notes before I begin talking about this week's parsha. I am working with my tech expert, that would be my son, on opening up the 10 Minutes of Torah as a more of a community kind of thing. That is, it will be directed at Temple Beth El, but anyone who wants to see it on YouTube will be able to as a podcast, something like that. It won't be any different in terms of content, except that I will have to introduce it a little bit differently to make sure that everyone knows who I am and where it's coming from. So the content will be the same. Temple Beth El will be directed to Temple Beth El, but you may see, starting next week, a different introduction. That's number one. Number two, as I mentioned, not last time, but the time before, I am very happy to have dedications of this teaching. So if you have someone, whether it's for a yahrzeit or a birthday or some other reason you want a dedication made, please let me know. I'm happy to dedicate it to that person or to whatever you might want. I would simply ask in exchange for that you make some donation to a Temple Beth El fund. Your choice of fund, your choice of amount. I don't even need to know about it. I'll just assume it's happening. So I'll probably repeat this announcement in the future, but I've already taken 2 of my 10 minutes. So it's time to get going onto Torah. Well, this week's Torah portion is Noach. Got to get the Cha in there, even though it's always pronounced as Noah. I'm not sure why the Cha kind of got dropped off of there, but in Hebrew, of course, that's how it's spelled. Noach is, again, one of those names that kind of reflect who he is. That is to say, that means to rest, Noach. And so ultimately, the ark will come to rest on land. So I believe that is how his name is associated. But let's start back at the beginning. I always love this Torah portion because it sits on the edge between those who wish to take the Torah seriously and those who see it as a bunch of stories just kind of talking about what our ancestors or some ancestors thought of creation and other kinds of things that came into the world, the speaking of different languages. And this Torah portion sits on that cusp because if you read it on a surface level, that's what it seems, a nice story. We have all these great things going on. You got the, some of them are not so great, right? But you got this big ark that Noah builds, and you have the animals coming into the ark. And, I said pairs of animals. It's interesting because there are 2 different descriptions of the kinds of animals brought into the ark. It does say each species having 2 animals, one male and one female, obviously, to continue after the flood. But in another place in the Parsha, it says that there are 7 of the animals that are pure, meaning Noah's going to have to sacrifice them eventually to give thanks. So the 2 by 2, that's what we always sing about and say about, but there's also this question of 7. So there is obviously a serious religious piece that's already built in here too. And I think a careful reading of the Parsha reveals a very serious look at how the Torah looks at the entire world, because this is not just the Jewish world yet, this is the entire world, and some of the principles that abide on it, and I will speak of one of them shortly. In the meantime, so what exactly happens? Well, God goes to Noah, who was introduced to us in last week's parasha, and says that I have decided to put an end to all flesh because, not just to put an end, but there's a reason, it's filled with lawlessness. In an interesting way, the word for lawlessness is, get this, Hamas. It's not the same Hamas as we hear of, who are Israel's and our terrible enemies. Hamas in Arabic is an abbreviation that they use that stands for their fuller name. But still quite interesting that evil, Hamas, is the word in the Torah. Well, at any rate, Noah slowly builds this ark, and then the rain comes. And it rains, of course, for 40 days. Every time I say that, I think of that great children's song that I sang my whole life growing up at camps, etc. It rained and rained for 40 daisy, daisy. I hope some of you know that song. Anyway, so it rains for 40 days, and then there's an additional 150 days before the waters recede. Finally, Noah begins to send out birds to see if the land is now dry somewhere. And one of them, the dove, first returns without finding a place to rest. Then it goes out 7 days later and returns with a leaf from an olive tree. Olives probably being the most important of all of the produce of the land of Israel. And then, and still, by the way, today too. And finally, the bird is sent out one more time, and it doesn't return, indicating that the ground was dry enough to support life once more. But that isn't where the Parsha ends. The Parsha then continues with another fascinating story about the Tower of Babel. And perhaps in a future year I will talk about the Tower of Babel, because that too has some great values and lessons for us. But what is the Tower of Babel? As the generations of Noah, after Noah rather, multiplied, they kind of revert back to not being such great people, and they try to build a tower up to the sky to make a name for themselves. These are called ziggurats, actually. They really did exist in ancient societies, especially in Mesopotamia. Attempts, to approach heaven. That's really what they were. So God decides instead that he's going to scatter all of the people, which God does, and confounds their speech, meaning they speak different languages. And finally, the Parsha ends with the lineage going from Noah to Abraham. Okay, well, a lot going on already in that Parsha. And what I want to talk about is the great symbol of what happens at the end of the flood. Here is what the Torah says about this. God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and your offspring, with every living thing that is with you, all that have come out of the ark, every living thing on earth. I will maintain my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. This is the sign that I set for the covenant between me and you. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. The bow, what he means by, or what the Torah means by the bow rather, is the rainbow. So why a rainbow? Rainbow is something beautiful. It's a nice symbol. It works well. But are there reasons why after the flood, God uses the rainbow as a symbol in the sky? First of all, today, whenever we see a rainbow, we are obligated to make a blessing over seeing that rainbow. And it's, you talk about a blessing over anything beautiful, which we should make. Seeing that rainbow is certainly a part of that. So what is the blessing we say? Blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of time and space, who takes note of the covenant, is faithful to the covenant, and fulfills what has been said. It's a long blessing, but it's a reminder every time we see a rainbow of that. But why the rainbow? Why choosing the rainbow? Pardon me. Well, one possibility is that what does a rainbow really represent? Notice a rainbow goes like this. It is an upside-down bow. It is a bow. And a rainbow is such that upside-down rainbow, rather, would indicate that what the bow is for, that is war, has now been turned upside down, and it's for peace. So one reason I think that that's why the rainbow was chosen. It's an upside-down bow. It represents war being turned upside down, which equals peace. But I think there's a second reason. A rainbow only comes out when sun and rain appear together in the sky. Now, think about it. Both are necessary for human existence. Too much of either. If we only had sun and no rain, it'd be destructive. If we only had rain and no sun, it would be destructive. So perhaps that's the other reason, besides turning the idea of war kinds of things upside down, perhaps the appearance of a rainbow in the sky is to tell us that in our society, there are very different interests. Some are interested in the sun, some are interested in the rain, some we have to have both together. And in our society, having both reminds us that although there are different interests, although there are different ways people can go, in a very real sense, being together is something that the rainbow reminds us of in spite of our different interests, and certainly worth reciting a blessing over. Well, this has been 10 Minutes of Torah, not just 2 by 2 coming onto the ark of every species, and not the 8 people. Who are the 8 people? The 3 sons of Noah, their wives, Noah and his wife who came onto the ark, but 10 Minutes of Torah. Shabbat Shalom.